Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here today with my April reading wrap-up. I've got my book journal with me so that I can tell you all about the books I finished in April. I finished 5 books in April. Some of them were a bit longer, so that's why a few less than last month. But I don't get wrapped up in the numbers. I look for quality rather than quantity. I read 3 books in print and 2 on audio, so I'm going to tell you about each of those. First up was This Tenderland by William Kent Kruger. Now, I've been hearing about this author for years, great things, but this is the first novel I've read by him. This happens to be our all-county reads selection for this year. And so my book group was able to get free copies of it, my neighborhood book group, and we read it for our April book group meeting. I loved this book. It just blew me away. It is not only my favorite book of the month, but will definitely be in my top 10 for the year, and maybe even number 1. Just loved it. So this is... Oh, there's so much to this novel. It is historical fiction set in 1932, but it's also a journey, an adventure. There is suspense, there is humor, there is a lot of heartfelt warmth. So it's about 4 orphan children in 1932. In order to escape from an abusive situation, they get in a canoe on the river that runs past their the place where they're staying, and decide that they're gonna try to make it on their own. Their plan is to take their canoe from where they are in southern Minnesota down the river to the Minnesota River, and then to the Mississippi River, and take the Mississippi River all the way down to St. Louis. So the 4 children are, first, Odie is the narrator, and I think he's 12 years old when the story begins, and he has an older brother, Albert, who is 16, and the 2 of them have been together at this. It's one of those Indian schools that were around back then, though some of the kids, including Odie and Albert, are orphans. Now, they're not Indian, but because their father died when they were in the area near this school, they were taken in by this school. It was not a good situation. So when they see the opportunity, they escape. Along with Odie and Albert comes their best friend, Mose. So Mose is Indian. He was found as a baby with his dead mother in a ditch, and the baby's tongue had been cut out. So because he was found abandoned in the reeds, the school named him Moses. But his best friends call him Mose. Now, because Mose can't speak, he was kind of isolated and lost until Odie and Albert came to the school and taught him sign language. Their mother was born deaf, so they had learned sign language from a young age, and they were able to open a whole new world for Mose and allow him to communicate. Now, along with the 3 boys, I believe Mose is about the same age as Albert, about 16. They've also got a little 6-year-old girl with them. And I won't tell you anything about her because that would be a spoiler. But the 4 of them set off in this canoe. So it's an adventure, it's a journey. The historical aspects are fascinating because it's the middle of the Depression. So what they see from the water and in the places they stop along the way just paints a vivid picture of how people were living at that time and the challenges that they faced. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And I said there's some suspense to it. There are times when the children are in grave danger. And toward the end, there are some huge plot twists that I never saw coming. Lots of them, actually. So I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. So just a wonderful novel in so many different ways. This Tenderland by William Kent Kruger. Now, my first audiobook in April that I listened to was a classic, The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, the surprise is that this is not a Sherlock Holmes story. It's not even a mystery. It is science fiction. And I had no idea that Doyle had written science fiction. So the book is set, it was written in 1912, so it's set about that time. It's narrated by a journalist. And he hears that there's this scientific expedition. Professor Challenger claims that he has seen prehistoric animals still alive in this remote region of South America in the Amazon basin. Now, some of his fellow scientists don't believe him. And so he proposes an expedition. And the journalist who's narrating the story decides to go along with him, as well as another scientist, one of the doubters. So the small group sets off for the Amazon, looking for this remote, isolated place where prehistoric animals, meaning dinosaurs, still exist. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say they do find it. There are all kinds of adventures that they have, all kinds of challenges that they face. So this novel is science fiction with plenty of suspense built in. It's a really intriguing premise. Now, the downside is it was written in 1912. So there is some racism here that just makes you cringe. You know, one of the helpers that they hire when they get there is a large African man that they just constantly describe as loyal and, you know, stereotypes, so many stereotypes. And they keep referring to the swarthy half-breeds that are helping on their expedition as well. So there is some really cringeworthy racism here. But as with all classics, you have to keep in mind when it was written, what the norms of the day are. Aside from that, it's an excellent story. It's suspenseful and exciting. And, you know, just a really cool premise. So that was The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle. Next up, I got back to my reading for Booktopia. Now, Booktopia is this amazing book event held the first weekend of May. I just got back from it Sunday night. It's incredible. It's just a whole weekend of readers and authors spending time together. Most of us read as many of the books as we can ahead of time. There were 8 books and authors featured this year. Most of them are new releases. And, you know, the authors always say this was such a unique experience because their talks are more like book discussions. They're very interactive. Lots of people have already read the book. They do avoid spoilers, but, you know, it's kind of like all these individual book group discussions. And in addition to that, there's a big group dinner, book trivia, a Yankee book swap, and just lots of time with great people who are readers and authors. So anyway, if you're interested in hearing more about what Booktopia was like and seeing some photos and videos, I will be posting a video next week all about Booktopia 2022. So look for that. So one of the books that I read in April was Black Cloud Rising by David Wright Faladay. Now, this was one of the Booktopia selections, and wow, what a powerful book. And David's talk was just amazing. So fascinating to hear how he put this book together and, you know, what was behind it. So he had written a nonfiction book, let me get the title for you, called Fire on the Beach, Recovering the Lost Story of Richard Etheridge and the Pea Island Lifesavers. So he had written that book, which was nonfiction, about this group of all African-American lifesavers, which was like an early precursor to the Coast Guard, who operated in this one station on the Outer Banks in North Carolina. Well, so Richard Etheridge was a real person. While he was researching that book, he learned that Richard Etheridge had served in the Civil War as a Union soldier after he was emancipated. And so then he wrote this historical fiction about the all-black regiment that Richard was a part of. And what they did, and the whole book just covers a short period of time, a week or two, but it's fascinating. And there are flashbacks to Richard's childhood. Sorry, it's a library book, as you can see, and I'm trying to keep the glare off of it. So, as the novel starts out, Richard's a child. He was born into slavery. His father is his master, which the author explained there was not proof of that in the research, but it seemed pretty clear that was probably the case. So anyway, Richard, as the son of the master, is treated a little better than the other slaves. And he kind of grows up with the master's white nephew, who he's adopted, as his brother. So this white boy and this black boy in the 1800s grow up together, playing together. But as Richard begins to get older, he begins to see that he's not the same as his brother, Patrick, who's, I guess, really his cousin. But anyway, so with that background, when the Union soldiers come through, and this was fascinating history that I knew nothing about, and that's what David said he was so excited about. As the Union soldiers came through, and this takes place in 1863, as the Union soldiers come through in 1863, they go door to door. So this is in Tidewater, Virginia, and eastern North Carolina and the Outer Banks. Richard grew up on Roanoke Island, which is in between the mainland and the Outer Banks. So the Union soldiers went door to door, house to house, farm to farm, freeing slaves at each place. And they had set up a freeman's colony nearby, so they had the option to go there, or they offered the men that the men could join the Union Army. So Richard and many other blacks did exactly that. One minute they were slaves, the next day they were soldiers in the Union Army. So, of course, there was still plenty of racism and, segregation, but they formed their own separate regiment. And the novel also gets into the white men who were leading that regiment. And it was fascinating because some of them, David explained, were real historical figures. Others he made up for the story. So this black regiment is moving through Tidal, Virginia, and eastern North Carolina and the Outer Banks, freeing slaves as they go. And they encounter Confederate rebels. They encounter white slave owners who don't want to give up their slaves. Of course, everywhere they go, the slaves are thrilled to see them and overjoyed to be freed. This story is just, there's so much to it. So many layers, so much depth. It's also a very intimate story because he puts Richard is the narrator, but the other characters are fully fleshed out as well. So you really get kind of an inside look at what it felt like to be a slave one day and a Union soldier the next. And, some of the complexities of racism at the time, that even though they were now a part of the Union Army, not all whites considered them equals. So it's a fascinating bit of historical fiction. I absolutely loved it. It's also suspenseful. It was a riveting novel. Loved meeting the author, who was just amazing. So that's Black Cloud Rising by David Wright Faladay. Highly recommend it. My next audiobook that I listened to in April was The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn. So Kate Quinn is another author that I've been hearing great things about for the last few years, and I hadn't read any of her books yet, so this was my first. The Diamond Eye is all about a real-life female Russian sniper during World War II. So, make sure I get her name right, Mila Pavlichenko. Before the war broke out, she was a single mother raising her son, going to school to get a degree, a historian, a librarian. She lived with her mother, who helped her out with her son. She's just living this fairly ordinary life, other than being a single mother at that time, trying to get a divorce from her horrible husband. And because her son didn't have any male role models in his life, she felt, she didn't want him to miss out on anything. And one thing he said he really wished his dad would teach him was to shoot. So Mila takes lessons, she gets certified, and she's actually very, very good at it. So then the war breaks out. The Nazis have invaded Russia. And Mila, like many women of that time in Russia, she's actually Ukrainian, but she was in Russia at the time. She signs up to serve in the Russian army. And it takes a while, of course, for the men to accept a woman sniper. But eventually they recognize her skill, and she gets promoted, and she becomes one of the best snipers of the war on the Russian side. And again, that is all based on fact. So in 1942, the Russians desperately need the United States to enter the war and help them, push the Nazis back. So they put together a contingent of decorated top-level Russian soldiers, including Mila. They think the Lady Sniper, who is sometimes referred to as Lady Death, will be a great representative of Russia as she meets the President of the United States and, tries to convince him to end the war. So Mila and the rest of the group, they go to the White House. They do meet the president, but Mila spends a lot more time with Eleanor Roosevelt. And they end up touring the U.S., again, to try to drum up support for getting into the war and helping Russia. And so there are these two different aspects to the story. There are scenes during the war of Mila and her partner in a trench, killing Nazi soldiers. And there are scenes of her becoming friends with Eleanor Roosevelt and touring the U.S. And eventually those two storylines come together. It is a fascinating story. So this is the kind of historical fiction that just is fascinating. And, it's the sort of thing where the parts you read that you think, oh, that would never have happened, are the parts that actually did happen, that are true. There is suspense to the story. You get to know Mila over time and find out, what kind of person she is. She's living a very unusual life because she is both a killer and a loving mother. And so there are all these different aspects that come together. It's a very, there's a lot of emotional depth, as well as plenty of action and suspense. So I really enjoyed it. I will definitely read more from Kate Quinn. That's The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn. And finally, I read one more Booktopia book at the end of April, The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum. This was another amazing book. I didn't mention Booktopia is hosted by the Northshire Bookstore in Manchester, Vermont. It's an amazing bookstore, and the booksellers there are just incredible. Some of them have been at Booktopia since it first began, 2011 maybe? I've been going since 2015. And they always pick the most incredible books, like books that you might not have discovered on your own. Although this book was chosen for Good Morning America's book club, so it is actually becoming pretty well known. It's just a completely unique novel. It starts out as a mystery, but there is so much more to that. So it's about a Black man named Ray, who is an incredible professional violin player. And he owns a $10 million Stradivarius violin. And the novel gets into the story of how he came to have that violin. It was passed down through his family. So the novel starts out with a mystery. Ray is in a hotel in New York City with his girlfriend, and when he gets home, he opens his violin case and realizes his violin's been stolen. So this violin is not just valuable to Ray, it's like the heart of his music. The fact that it was played by his great-grandfather, the fact that his grandmother gave it to him, it means so much to him. And Ray grew up relatively poor, playing a school rental, in a school where even the music teacher, despite Ray's obvious talent, the music teacher just kind of ignored him. So for him to have this amazing violin, it's not just valuable money-wise, it's very, very important to him emotionally. So that's how the novel begins. And there's this huge investigation because of the value of the violin. The insurance company gets involved because it happened in New York. The NYPD gets involved. Because it's such a valuable instrument, the FBI gets involved. So all these people are investigating the loss of the violin. And then the story kind of backtracks to earlier in Ray's life, and you get a glimpse into his childhood, his family, who are awful. You know right from the first chapter that his family are suspects in the theft. So you know right away there's something going on there. They're terrible. You get all this background into how Ray ended up where he is, as a highly ranked violinist with a $10 million violin, playing in the top orchestras in the US. And he's getting ready to compete in the Tchaikovsky competition, which is held in Russia, which only one American has ever won it, and that was for piano, and certainly never a Black person. So Ray is going to compete in that, but he needs his violin. So that's kind of the setup. There is so much to this novel. Yes, it's a mystery, but it's also a family drama. It's historical fiction. The history of both the violin and Ray's family are fascinating. It's an investigation of racism through the years, through the centuries. It's just a wonderful book. And it's the kind of novel that you just can't put down. Absolutely loved The Violin Conspiracy. Unfortunately, the author got sick and could not join us at Booktopia as planned. But he actually got out of bed for the first time in days to do a Zoom call, which was up on a big screen. Unfortunately, I missed that, but my mother saw it and said it was incredible. In my Booktopia summary, I will include a couple of short video clips from Brendan's talk so you can hear in his own words about the book. So that's The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum, one of my favorite Booktopia books, one of my favorite books of the month, and highly recommended. So that's what I read in April. I would love to hear about what you read last month. What was your favorite book? Tell me all about it in the comments down below.